Welcome to the Autonomic Healing Podcast. I'm Tom Pells.
And I'm Ruth Lawrenson. We'll be unpacking what it looks like to activate your brain to holistically manage stress and trauma that bring healing to the mind, body, and spirit.
Being free to live authentically as humans.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started. I'm looking forward to having a conversation with you today around community.
Which is interesting because we're having a conversation
which
about
is
community, which is community.
That's true. And part of the reason is because, as we've started season 2, our intention has been to take a bit of a deeper dive into rational intimacy. And, we started with episode 1, which was about the way we love, all these different types of love. Mm-hmm. And then last time we had a conversation around the impact that change has and how grief's involved in that. But there's something about rational intimacy that you can't get away from, the fact that community is part of it. It's not just loving ourselves, which is incredibly important, but it's loving others too. It's operating, and which we're built for as human beings.
Because if you're not loving others, you're not really loving yourself.
Yeah, we're not.
Because of the impact of loneliness and isolation.
Absolutely. We're not supposed to be alone. I think I think most people deep down would agree that we're not created, whatever beliefs you have about spirituality or not. I think there's a deep down sense in most human beings that appreciates that belief that we're not meant to be alone. Man, women are not created to be alone. We're created to be in relationship in some way with one another.
There's a reason that one of the worst tortures that can be inflicted on a human being is isolation. There's a reason for that. Mm-hmm. It's just terrible things.
So we want to talk a little bit about community. It's a really interesting topic. I think that it can be a word that's been overused and misunderstood. And, yes. I know it can be a bit of a buzzword. It's
practically become a cliche that is now meaningless, which is ironic for something that is so essential to our well-being, which is a sense of community, of fellowship, of being connected with others. I would argue that we can't have a healthy sense of self without others, because it's like living in an echo chamber.
Absolutely. And so we have the situation, like you say, I agree with you. I think the word's been so overused. It's a buzzword. And it means all sorts of different things to different people. So can we start there? Can we talk about what we think, the real core meaning of community is? Like, what is the essence of community?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you look at just the definition of it, it's a group of people living in the same place or having a particular characteristic in common. At a fundamental level, I'm connected to you in some way. That's community because we live in the same place. That's a community. Or we have a particular characteristic in common.
And so that could be living in the same place. That could be, a family unit, but also it could be, I think back in the day, the village life, right? Yeah. That would have been considered as living in the same place. We share that identity of, and right now we share the identity of being in Colorado.
Or some group. It could be a religious community. It could be a service organization. It could be a club or a hobby. We share these things.
Yeah.
And that's community. Then a second definition that goes beyond simply demographics and things like that, or shared interests, is a deeper level of connection, which is that feeling of fellowship with others as a result of common attitudes, interests, or goals.
Yes.
So I can be a part of a community simply because of where I live, but that doesn't mean I have a sense of fellowship or belonging or connectedness. But community is about both of those.
So those two things have to be in place for real community. So you could, like you say, you could happen to be living in the same place as someone, or happen to be going to a club or some sort of society and not have that shared fellowship. So that's not really community. That's just kind of, it's a step towards it, but it's not the fulfillment of community.
Even at a family level, think of people who just live in isolation. They're living in the same house. They're all together. They definitely have something in common. They're a family.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they're isolated from each other. They have no sense of fellowship. They're alone.
Mm.
Even though they're in the middle of the same dwelling. But they're alone. And that has devastating impacts on mental and physical health.
Mm-hmm.
To not have that.
So I think one of the big challenges that we're facing as societies, as cultures, is this, there's this deep, I think we have a deep desire for a connection, for that fellowship, for not just being around the same people, but connecting with people on in which is kind of rational intimacy, on an intimate way, in a healthy way. But I think...
But that's not what the majority of people experience.
I actually agree with you.
The majority of people experience the tsunami of stress, and that's all they know, and they don't experience rational intimacy. Because think about the tsunami of stress, and in the context of community, self-interacting with other people.
Yes. And by the way, the tsunami of stress is what the majority of people are experiencing all the time.
One stage or another, everyone's experiencing.
So let's take the tsunami of stress in the context of community, impact.
Interpersonal relationship.
Yeah.
So let's maybe shift away from the word community to interpersonal relationship.
Mm-hmm.
However many people,
it could be one
person, it could be a dozen, it could be hundreds, or however many. So we sense or perceive a threat to well-being, and that flight or fight response kicks in. And that sensed or perceived threat to well-being might be another person. It might be interacting with another person.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that's not just social anxiety disorder or agoraphobia. That could be, I don't sense I'm safe with you.
Mm-hmm.
You're not safe.
And that comes from our perceptions.
Which may be real or imagined, but whether it's even real or imagined, it's still incredibly impactful. And we sense that. We have a sense of stress and need. And that stress or need is a reaction to sensed or perceived threat to well-being.
Mm. So that's the starting point.
That's the starting point of the tsunami of stress, and that's the starting point for the breakdown of community.
I mean, I'd like to just kind of earth this conversation a little bit, because and just invite the listeners just to kind of think about their own situations, because just imagine the people in your life right now. There's going to be all sorts of different people, but how easy it can be to sense, whether it's rational or not, real or not, sense that someone is a threat, or someone's actions, or someone's words, or someone's activity is a threat to your well-being. I mean,
their beliefs, the color of their skin.
It happens all the time on individual levels, cultural levels, national levels. So, I mean, I just wanted to kind of bring it into a very real picture for us.
Yes.
And that's just stage one of the tsunami of stress.
And we want to flee that threat. Well, fellowship is the opposite of fleeing. It's embracing. It's connecting with.
So our knee-jerk reaction in that space when we sense that threat is to flee it, to get away from it.
There was a 2018 national survey, and this is how impactful COVID has been, that it's like a point of reference for everything changed. And particularly when it comes to community, everything changed with COVID.
It did, yeah.
And this is pre-COVID. A 2018 national survey by Cigna that found that loneliness levels have reached an all-time high, with nearly half of 20,000 U.S. adults reporting they sometimes or always feel alone.
Wow.
Out of 20,000 people, 10,000 sometimes or always felt alone. And 40% of the survey participants also reported they sometimes or always feel that their relationships are not meaningful and that they feel isolated. So in other words, half of them have no sense of community.
So it's a massive issue for us.
Yep.
And I think part of what we're getting at with the tsunami of stress, and we just talked about that first stage, was perceiving threat, a threat to well-being, is that when we're living in that cycle, those patterns, the outcome, our reaction to that is to almost pursue loneliness.
It not almost. It is to pursue it, because interacting with another human being is sensed or perceived as a threat to well-being.
Yeah. And actually, I think from a lot of the conversations I've had with people recently, I talk a lot with people about community and about the desire for community. I think there's a huge desire for community, and there's also this like huge fear of it because right. I think there has been this threat. There has been this like, oh my gosh, I've been burnt, or
and if
I shouldn't trust that.
One time it was, it still will be, or maybe, so don't risk.
But the problem with that, of course, is that loneliness is not the answer.
Oh, not only is it not the answer, it's a terrible risk in and of itself. There was a study done by a professor at Brigham Young University, Julianne Holt-Lunstad, that related to and a professor of psychology and neuroscience, and that related to the impact of loneliness on health. And I'm not talking about just mental health. I'm talking about physical health.
Yeah.
That think about the impact on health of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Well documented, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or having alcohol use disorder, abusing alcohol. And think of the impact medically on physical health, right? She found that loneliness heightens health risk as much as those.
Wow.
Loneliness impairs your health.
Just your physical health.
Just your physical health,
yeah.
As much as smoking 15 cigarettes a day or having an alcohol use disorder. She also found that loneliness and social isolation are twice as harmful to physical and mental health as obesity. And you can see lots of studies about the dangers of obesity, and there are whole national programs about how to deal with childhood obesity because of the medical health and mental health impacts of that. And loneliness is twice that.
Twice that. That's incredible. And I would imagine as well that it might even lead to some of those things.
Oh, absolutely.
Smoking or drinking.
Right,
or
because
eating.
We just want to feel good.
Mm-hmm.
What will make me feel good? Mm-hmm. What will calm me? What will comfort food?
Mm-hmm.
What will give me a sense of some energy? Nicotine, etc.
Yeah, and I think so we've got some real problems in our society because we've got this we've got the tsunami of stress as just a paradigm that we're all going through where we're sensing and perceiving threats.
That is fundamentally antithetical to community.
Yes. And then we've got also these kind of, we've got the expansion of technology And
which just makes it even more possible to isolate and be alone.
I wonder as well, Tom, whether,
Ironically.
with technology, because you can feel it's a real dilemma, I think, because there is this, in some ways, there's more connectivity than ever before, but it's
the nature of it.
But it's almost on that base level. It's like now we all get to live on the internet or on Instagram or on social media, just like, I guess, that first level of community. It's just, that's what community is, but we just happen to all be in the same space. No, it isn't. That's not the fulfillment of community. It's the connection. And I wonder whether there's this false sense of feeling connected. I mean, people have talked about this for years now, but you can sit at home spending hours on social media feeling like you've got all the friends in the world and actually feel incredibly lonely.
Can't tell you the number of people that I have treated for stress and trauma who list as a maladaptive coping response. In other words, a way to cope in an unhealthy manner with stress and trauma, and it's social media.
Wow.
They list it because they're constantly going through their social media posts or who's doing what and where and interacting and that sort of thing. So much what appears to be social connection is actually simply a manifestation of social isolation.
Yeah.
Because it gives you the appearance of community.
Mm-hmm.
It gives you the sense of, I am part of community, and yet it's a maladaptive way to cope with the lack of it.
Totally.
Which is totally ironic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's in the category to me of a way to give the appearance of something, but to do it in a way that you don't actually have to experience it.
And I think when you say that, it makes me think of the fact that for a lot of people who are lonely, they're lonely either because, or maybe all of these reasons, they're lonely because of the tsunami of stress. There's a significant level of stress and trauma which is affecting their relationships, is impacting their sense of healthy community, right? But then there's all sorts of other things too. Actually, I think if I know that for me, and there's been times in my life, in my early 20s, I remember there were just seasons where, if you're stuck in loneliness, you need to be brave to trust community again, or to get out of the house and go down the street and meet someone. But now we've got a society, so we need kind of courage to get out of loneliness. But actually, we've got a whole culture that's almost sending us into it. So now we have to swim upstream. Now we have to we can easily get away with being lonely and no one would know. Whereas I think maybe back in the day, there would be more, we haven't seen so-and-so around.
Never
but now,
talked to anybody.
Yeah.
Not getting out. How are they doing? How are they getting... Yes. In the tsunami of stress, the initial stage is stress and need. And stress and need are ubiquitous. I mean, there's always stress, there's always need. But the difference between rational intimacy is there's a sense of contentment and a willingness and an interest and a capacity to risk addressing the stress and need.
So there's that risk.
Yes, but with the tsunami of stress, there's stress and need. But because of the perceived stress, the perception that the stress is unmanageable and the need is not able to be met, will not be met, that's when we flee. That's contentment, is stay, be a part of,
even though it might not all be perfect. It never is.
Isn't. Because and this goes back to another podcast, there is no option but to risk. And we either so no risk isn't an option. So we either choose a healthy risk, or we are inevitably, by not risking, that not having the bravery, not having the sense of agency, we are choosing an unhealthy risk, a detrimental risk as opposed to a beneficial risk, but with a tsunami of stress because of the unresolved, the lack of homeostasis, optimum function, things are operating the way they are, or the ability to get back into that the stress and need is sensed or perceived as a threat, or even is perceived as unmanageable, and that's why the tsunami of stress kicks off with the stress and need and quickly escalates into the distress and discontent. And have you ever been with someone who is distressed or discontented?
Yes.
Probably been that ourselves.
Probably.
Many times,
I
right?
think so.
Are they attractive to be in community with?
It incurs stress.
Right. It's like contagious. Like, don't infect me with your distress and discontent. Who wants to be around that? We don't want to be around that. And the other person probably doesn't want to be around other people in their distress and discontent. And yet, ironically, and this is a social media kind of thing, that it may be that what they think will make them feel better is the illusion or the appearance that I'm in community. That relieves my distress and discontent because I have an illusion of I'm okay and I'm in community and I'm connected, but the truth is I know I'm not. And it's just a false front.
It's very worrying, I think, to think about it like that because, you know, the odds seem to be so stacked against breaking free of the tsunami of stress and having that courage to take healthy risks into rational intimacy. And the mask is so, it's almost like it's easy just to kind of hide within it.
And it can even be rewarded and reinforced. You pretend, I'll pretend, and look at us in relationship. Except we're not in relationship.
And I think it's not just, you know, I think this is the need that I'm sensing from, like I said, the people that I'm having conversations with right now about community. I think there's this real level of discontent with the facade,
right.
With whether, and it's not just social media actually. It's even some of the groups or some of the clubs or some of the churches that we're part of.
The social organizations.
It feels like there's a shallowness to that maybe we're getting some sort of kind of appearance of community, but how deep does it go? You know,
because it can't go deeper because of the sensed threat or perceived threat to well-being that the interaction carries with it.
So we're all kind of dancing around each other,
right?
So to speak.
And just think about it this way. Think of someone that you know and you sense is distressed and discontented, and yet they act like and say everything's fine. And you know, no, it's not. I know it's not. But they won't let you in.
I mean, you know, as a British person,
it's been you.
As a British person, that's like part of our culture. You know, it's really difficult for, you know, we have the social interactions are.
There's the
you
phrase.
Know, we talk about the weather.
Stiff upper lip.
We do, and it's almost inbred in the culture just to be like fine. So getting underneath that, just even culturally as a British person,
but getting underneath that is threat. And then that escalates from stress and need to distress and discontent into avoidance and isolation. We flee with the stress and need. We fight with the distress and discontent. It's a losing fight, so we want to flee, and we flee into avoidance and isolation. Next stage, after you have intentionally or unintentionally avoided and isolated, and the sense or perceived threat might be the other person, another person, And when we have avoided and isolated, and we can't get away from it, or the impact of it is too great that we can't sustain the avoidance and isolation, then we get into resistance. I don't want to deal with that connection with the other person, interaction with the other person, the risk of really conversing and sharing. I don't want to deal with that. Resistance, defiance, I'm not gonna. And then anger shows up. And we are angry. And it might be anger at another person. It might be anger at some issue. It might be anger at self. But the resistance, defiance, and anger now make interactions all the more dangerous, all the more, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to do that. And then we just get into that non-assertive place, and then we become passive. And the resistance, defiance, and anger shows up as a sort of capitulation. Okay, let's go along to get along. Or people-pleasing. What will make you happy with me? And that's a way to resist, defy, and be angry. Or it could be aggression. And I matter, and what I want, I'm demanding. And all of which does what to community? The fellowship? It destroys it.
Yeah.
And then we just want to feel good. And weirdly and ironically, the very isolation from community can make us feel good because it gives us the illusion of being safe.
That's crazy. Isn't that crazy?
That's crazy making. Yeah.
But you can see how that happens.
Of course.
So you've just really explained the tsunami of stress, the 4 stages, right,
up to
in a relationship. So you could kind of apply that to like one person or 10 people or whatever. Like, but actually, so we've got this kind of flee the threat, fight the threat, flee the threat. I can't say it.
Threat, fight the threat. Yes.
And then within that, there's this. Say them again. Those 4 states. Like, what are the things?
Stress and need. Distress and discontent.
And that's when you isolate.
And then avoidance and isolation.
Yeah.
And then resistance, defiance, anger, and passive aggressive or passive aggressive.
And then this whole thing just keeps repeating.
And all of that is the death knell of community.
Wow. But I think what I wanted to get at, Tom, was I was just thinking within it, and this kind of the cycle, the trap of, and then this idea of, oh my gosh, we've got to risk breaking this somehow. But I was thinking about the situation of, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but where you take the risk and it falls flat on your face, or, so I've been in situations where I've thought, I do feel that threat and I don't feel safe, but I'll take the risk. I'll be open with someone. I'll be, real with someone. I won't, or maybe my everything within my whole body wants to avoid and isolate right now, but I'll choose to be present. And then it's just like someone's, sticking a finger up at you.
Which just proved that's a bad idea. Don't do that.
So what do you do in that situation? Because actually, unfortunately, the likelihood of that will happen because everyone else is in their tsunami of stress. Right? So how do you break? I guess you've got to choose a lifestyle rather than this idea of, well, let's see if it can be proven to me. Because the likelihood is we will get those experiences. We will take risks. We will share deep levels of our story and have people kind of ignore us. Or, we will be vulnerable and I know you've got a different word for that, haven't you? Vulnerable. What's your word that you talk about? Available.
And that's the alternative.
So talk more about that, because I just stumbled on that little word. But, we think...
And the reason you stumbled on it
is because it's
embedded. in the dynamics.
So I think in terms of that risk place, most people think, well, maybe I've got to be vulnerable. And then we're vulnerable,
no.
and then we're vulnerable, and then we don't, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, and then it feels like, oh, I'm back at square one. But there's another alternative.
Available.
Talk more about
that's
that.
what makes community possible that is healthy, regardless of how the other person responds. Because it's all about boundaries. With vulnerable, what vulnerable means, by definition, is a defenseless position, an undefendable place to be. That's what vulnerable is. I can't protect and defend myself. Why does that even begin to sound like a good idea?
So yeah, like, don't be vulnerable. Why are we being vulnerable?
No. But you just need to learn to be vulnerable. No, it's not necessary. It's better than being defensive and guarded and I'm not going to connect with you. Let your guard down. But in the absence of a better alternative to defensiveness and closed and guarded and I'm not sharing and Simon and Garfunkel song, I am a rock, I am an island, I have no need of love, and all the rest of that. Okay, vulnerability is better than that.
Yeah.
And probably potentially beneficial if you're with somebody who is actually safe, who is empathetic, who will support and care and that sort of thing. Okay, I can go that far, but none of it's even necessary because the alternative is being available. With vulnerable, think about it. I can't protect, I can't defend myself.
Yeah, it's almost having this opposite reaction to, it's like, well, the defensiveness isn't working, so I'll go the opposite way, and I won't be defensive. I will be so vulnerable.
Right.
Now I'm kind of putting myself in a position where I could completely...
Which is better than defensive and closed.
I agree with you, yeah.
And
I wonder whether that's the swing that we've seen in society recently, with a lot of books and talks and, there's this kind of drive to be... I mean, I've heard it so many times, like, oh, it's the power of vulnerability or...
Yes. So, but because inherent in the nature of being vulnerable is undefended, if you're talking about someone who is just consumed with a sense of need, of risk and danger and threat, asking them to be vulnerable and give up that seeming safety of I'm just keeping my distance. You're asking them to do something entirely contradictory that actually feeds the sense of threat.
And it's
because I'm giving up the ability to defend and protect myself.
And potentially, like you say, it is better than being isolated and defensive, but actually potentially it can be incredibly harmful if you're vulnerable in the wrong places.
Or you're just putting yourself in a place where you can be harmed and hurt even more. So rather than vulnerability, availability is, and if you think about vulnerability related to boundaries, you don't have any. You've given them away. Because a boundary is a way to protect yourself, to keep yourself safe. Why would you give away a boundary? That just isn't rational. To be available is to assert a boundary. I will share. I am open. I will talk about. I will be available to a degree. But if it involves me being harmed and threatened even more, no, then I can choose not to be available. I just hang up the close sign. We're not open for business. So think of the open and closed sign that you might find on a shop. It's because the services that they provide are available or not available.
Yeah.
That's like a boundary. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We don't even think twice about that. Oh, the shop's closed. Or the shop is open.
So it's okay to be open and to close, and to have the discernment with various different people to know when to open and when to close. Would you say it like that?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't even say it's okay. It's essential to healthy intimacy. I treated offenders in forensic psychotherapy for a couple of decades. There is no way that it was beneficial to them or me for me to be vulnerable.
No.
No. That's going to be potentially and likely manipulated, exploited, taken advantage of. No. So I learned to be available, and I learned when not to be available. And I'm just not available. Why? Because it's not going to be beneficial to me, or safe, or healthy, or productive, or beneficial. So, nope, shop's closed. It doesn't mean I'm not willing to put the open sign up, but not if I'm going to be harmed.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes we can choose to be available, knowing that there can be some harm, but it's the way to bridge the connection with the other person. And I'm willing to go that extra mile. But I'm not going there to be vulnerable. I'm not going the extra mile to be vulnerable. I'm not going the extra mile for any reason other than that it will be, and I can anticipate it, beneficial for that person and me. And if it's not beneficial for that other person and myself, the shop's closed.
Yeah.
Because if we put ourselves in a vulnerable position where someone can harm us, think about in reverse. Think about when you have harmed someone. How do you feel?
Terrible.
Yeah. Shame, guilt, fear, self-condemnation. Well, weirdly, if you think about it, if you put yourself in a vulnerable position where that person can harm you, what position are they in?
The same, yeah.
Why would you want to do that to someone else?
So it's not a very good way of loving someone.
It's not a way of loving them at all. That's why I'm not a fan of vulnerability.
Yeah.
As an alternative to defensiveness and being closed, yeah, it's preferable to that. But when you've got availability, and I can have a boundary, and I can choose when to share, what to share, when not to share, and who not to share that with, that's called a boundary. And boundaries are real important.
You know, I wonder whether some people do you think that some people would see that as, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here, but do you think that some people would see that as controlling? Like, you know.
Oh, absolutely.
So
because they want you to be vulnerable.
It's not so much controlling, but it's actually loving yourself in such a way that you respect your boundaries. You know what is appropriate to share with whom and what isn't, and when to open and when to close. So it's not being, is it not necessarily being, I guess what I'm alluding to, Tom, is, I've experienced people who are a little bit hot and cold, you know, and that's not this, right?
No.
That's a different thing, because that can be a bit of controlling behaviour, but this is about loving ourselves well enough to know, no, we're not going to put everything out there with no boundaries. We're going to know, we're going to have wisdom, we're going to have discernment, and we're going to love ourselves. And actually, it is loving others, like you said.
And it is treating them with respect.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Which gets into the whole issue of secrecy and privacy, which I think we've talked about at some point in a past podcast, but I'll reprise it now because it's very significant. Secrecy is bred from and feeds on a sense of threat. If we feel threatened or we anticipate there's some threat, then we want to become secret and we want to keep secrets. And secrecy is always detrimental to community.
Yeah.
But we conflate two different terms that relate to information, and that's private and secret. And not distinguishing between secret and private, it doesn't allow for community. So, with secret and private, they have two things in common: a need and a right to know something. Okay?
Yeah.
You're just talking about vulnerability, sharing, that sort of thing. With secrecy, the other person has both a need and a right to know and are denied that.
Yeah.
That's secrecy.
Yeah.
The other person has both a need and a right to know something, and they are kept from that information.
So by holding something a secret from the other person, you're causing them harm because actually they should know it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they have a right to know it, and they have a need to know it. But because we use secret and private frequently interchangeably, when they aren't, and they are entirely different things, there's the secret service. No, it's not. I would say that's the private service. Think about it this way. With private, the other person does not have both a need and a right to know something. They may have the right to know it, but they don't have the need to know it. Or they may have a need to know it, but they don't have the right to know it. Then private is something where the person is not informed. Why? Because it's private. That other person does not have a need and a right to know. So, for example, in one country's interaction with another, there is the private service. The other country does not have a need and a right to know all sorts of information. That doesn't mean it's being kept secret from them. No, they just don't have a need and a right to know that information. Like, what is our defense capability? They don't have a need and a right to know that information. With an ally, maybe we'll let them in on some of that. But this is about private and secret. At an interpersonal level, I may have community and fellowship and relationship with another person. With secret, they have a need and a right to know certain pieces of information. I'm making sure that they don't. That's death to a relationship.
It's very detrimental. Yeah.
Yeah. But I can be in the deepest, most intimate relationship with another person, and private is very important. Show me a couple that know absolutely everything about each other and what their thoughts are, and I'll show you somebody who's not going to be a couple very long, because there's no sense of privacy. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. This is so helpful. And I think that these are some of the handles, actually, because I think it's very easy to kind of go, well, we need community and we need it to be real community. And there's an epidemic of loneliness. And how do we get... But actually, we're getting into the weeds here because there's very real reasons why people are choosing loneliness with a facade of community. Because of these things.
Because they don't have a sense of privacy.
And... So we've got this secrecy and vulnerability. They're almost going together.
Not almost.
I don't want to be secret, then I'll be the other thing, which is completely
vulnerable,
which is not helpful either.
Which is why I'm divulging all sorts of vulnerable. I'm violating my own privacy.
Yeah.
You're
sharing your private.
You're discerning between what is private and what isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's private, the other person doesn't have both a need and a right to know that information.
Mm.
Even though someone may say, well, I demand that you give that, or I manipulate you into sharing it, well, then community just took a nosedive because shared something very private.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, the other person didn't have a need and a right to know. You shared it with them, and you weaponized the relationship.
Yeah. So the alternative is this picture of being available, opening and closing, knowing, loving yourself well enough to know when to be open, when to be closed, when to be available to someone, how to set boundaries. And within that, there's this dynamic of there are certain things that I will be private on, and there are other things that I will share. But no, it's all
based
those
on, does the other person have a need to know it and a right to know it?
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't have both, then don't share.
Unless you want to choose to, right?
Why would you want to violate your own privacy?
Well, I wonder whether there's some things that are, some of those deep areas of privacy that you want to journey alongside someone
Stay with me now.
Okay.
Because if you are in a relationship where you can be that available, then they have both a need and a right to know it.
Okay.
And you're not violating your privacy.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason that when we go to the bathroom, we close the door. For example. Or you go to a shop and there's a back room. That's not where the public gets to go.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to go there. I don't have a right to know what goes on in there.
Yeah.
Unless it affects me. And they're keeping secrets back there. Then I'm going to shop someplace else.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
You follow that?
Totally.
By way of an analogy?
Mm-hmm.
A healthy, intimate relationship is rooted in availability with privacy.
That's great.
And that allows contentment where there can be and inevitably will be stress and need, but there's a sense of contentment because I'm okay. This is safe.
Well, it's safe for both parties because it's safe because you know that if that relationship is healthy, if it is an intimate and healthy, whether that's and I think it's important here to kind of paint the picture a little bit. This could be a friendship, or it could be a spouse, or it could be a group,
parent and child. It could be
there's all sorts of dynamics here that this can apply to.
Citizens in the community with me.
But I think the reason it's safe is because there's this trust that if I don't even need to search out any information because I trust that the fact that the other person, if they know that I need to know this information
and I have a right
to it, they will share.
Totally.
And the rest is like, I enjoy their
availability. I will
availability.
reciprocate that. Mm-hmm. Yes. Where there isn't availability and privacy, there is inevitably secrecy.
Wow.
And vulnerability.
Yeah.
Because then the other person and I not being available, that creates a vulnerability because there's information, because of the secrecy, that I don't know.
Mm. So, as we wrap this episode up on community, on the challenges of it, on understanding that deeper ache, I think, in society for this, and also understanding all of the complexities around why people have the perceived threat that they do. What would you say as a lasting thought, Tom, to people who are in this space with, especially in terms of kind of rational intimacy and AHA? And I mean, I feel like this conversation's been really good in terms of those two words, super helpful: be available and be private, and understand that those are good, healthy ways to relate to another human being in a loving way that loves yourself and that person.
Because then we're affirming boundaries.
Mm-hmm. So do you have a lasting, a last thought?
It would be, I guess it would be this. And it's a paradigm shift. And you just begin accounting for a dynamic that's happening that you may not have taken into consideration. And as you interact with others, it's kind of like you assess the moment. Does this person have a need and a right to know whatever it is that we're talking about? Whatever it is I might share. If they don't have a need and a right to know it, don't share it. Because you're violating your own privacy. But if they do, then risk it. Because now you're nurturing community. You follow that?
Yeah.
And then you'll naturally be able to choose between being available or not.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's great. Well, I'm looking forward to our next episode. We're carrying on with rational intimacy. We're kind of nearing those, getting into the perceptions, which
because
is so great.
Those are what drive the unhealthy, detrimental secrecy and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like how we perceive things that
as opposed to the actually rational, which can discern.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Tom, and listeners, and we'll see you at the next episode.
You've been listening to the Autonomic Healing Podcast.
Join us next time as we continue in our conversations with Tom. If you're interested in pursuing your own autonomic healing journey and want to find a practitioner, visit our website, innerworkings.org. See you at the next episode.